Chapter 3 of Zhang Henshui's Cause of Crying and Laughing, beautiful shadows hidden in the book of inverted thoughts, lingering love words, walking outside the forest into the morning light. But when Jiashu was leaving, Fengxi gave him a paper bag. How could he wait until he got home to read it? He opened the paper package while walking. Looking at it, I felt happy again. It turned out that the paper bag was nothing else but a 4-inch, half-length photo of Fengxi himself. This photo was originally mounted in a small glass frame and hung on the wall inside the kang. At that time, I was sitting opposite and took a look. Now Fengxi chased and sent it to me. She must have known that she loved this photo very much. I thought to myself, this woman is really desirable, but it's a pity that she comes from a family that sings drum books. The one who is close to vermilion is red, the one who is close to ink is dark. In the gentleness, there is always a bit of wantonness, which is a pity. I kept thinking about it, and walked all the way, forgetting to take the car. When I got home, I felt a little tired, so I lay down on the sofa and savored the conversation I just had with her. Liu Fu brought him tea and water, but he didn't even know that he sat there for more than 2 hours. As I got up and went to the backyard, suddenly there was a smell of 5-spice stew coming from the air. Suddenly my heart moved and I realized that I haven't had lunch today. Walking back to the room, he rang the bell and called Liu Fulai and said, "Come and buy me something to eat. I haven't eaten yet." Liu Fulai said, "Young master, haven't you eaten yet? Why didn't you tell me when you came back?" Shu said, "I forgot to tell you." Liu Fu said, "Do you have anything to do with Coca-Cola? Why did you forget to eat?" Jiashu couldn't explain the reason and just smiled. Liu Fu said, "It's really slow to buy things. I'll ask the kitchen to prepare some for you." After saying that, he also left with a smile. After a while, the cook brought a plate of cold meat, a bowl of soup, and a bowl of sweet-scented osmanthus rice. This osmanthus rice is egg-fried rice. Because the eggs in the rice look like small osmanthus flowers, it is called osmanthus rice. But if you really want to ask this question from bingers tend to count their classics and forget their ancestors. At that time, the cook brought vegetables and rice to the table, and Jiashu sat down to eat alone. While eating, I couldn't help but think of the comedy scene where Fengxi kept eating fried noodles at home. Looking back, if I really ate noodles at her house, I'm afraid she would make them for me to eat, which would make it even more delicious. The person was in a trance, and with the spoon in his hand, he just scooped up the soup and poured it into the rice bowl. He poured 1 spoonful, and another, and before he knew it, he poured more than half of the soup into the rice bowl. Occasionally, I stopped pouring the soup. When I looked down, I started laughing. I thought, no one has ever made soup out of sweet-scented osmanthus rice. If the footman saw it, he wouldn't say that I'm from the south and don't even know how to eat sweet-scented osmanthus rice. At that time, I lowered my head, muttered, washed a large bowl of soup with sweet-scented osmanthus rice, and ate it quickly. But before he finished eating, Liu Fu had already scooped out water and prepared a towel. After Jiashu finished eating, he handed over the handkerchief. Jiashu took the handkerchief with one hand and wiped his face, then reached into his arms to fumble around with the other hand. After a while, he suddenly lost the handkerchief and started looking around the room. I found them all in the drawers, on the bookshelves, and under the pillows on the bed. I ran from the inner room to the outer room, and from the outer room to the inner room. I just ran around looking for it. Seeing that Liu Fu couldn't help it, he asked, "Master, Chow, what did you throw away?" Jiashu said, "It's a small paper bag wrapped in a newspaper. It's less than a foot long. It's flat and flat. Do you see it?" Liu Fu said, "I didn't see you bring this paper bag back. Where can you find it?" I couldn't find the family tree anywhere. I was busy for a while, and had no choice but to give it a try. After resting for a while, lie down in the soft couch in the outer room, when he remembered that he had not read today's newspaper, he asked Liu Fu to take the newspaper from the table in the inner room and read it. Liu Fu walked into the back room and took out a stack of folded newspapers that had not yet been opened. He dragged the newspapers and heard something fall to the ground. Liu Fu bent down and picked it up. It was exactly a flat newspaper bag. The newspaper had fallen apart because it had no adhesive, and a corner of the newspaper was exposed. Liu Fu didn't say anything. He took a peek first and saw that it was a half-length photo of a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Then he suddenly realized the reason why Master Biao came back today and lost his mind. Still wrapping the newspaper and the photo, he shouted, "Isn't this a newspaper package?" When Jiashu heard about it, he quickly ran into the house, snatched the newspaper away, and asked with a smile, "Have you opened it and read it?" Liu Fudao said, "No. This seems to be a foreign book." Jiashu said, "How do you know it is a foreign book?" Liu Fu said, "It feels like it is a foreign book." Don't argue with him, just smile. After Liu Fu had cleaned up the house, he took out the photo, lay down and grasped it carefully. Fortunately, the photo was not big, so he put it in a thick suit book. In the afternoon, Bohi came back from the yamen. As he was walking in the corridor, he asked through the window, "Jiashu, have you got the application regulations?" Jiashu said, "I have got them back." He took out a copy of the charter that was mailed a few days ago from the desk drawer and walked out. "Bo," he said, "there are really many universities in Beijing. If you look specifically at their charters, none of them are very well organized. Moreover, for students to take the exam, they have to pass all the homework they should do. In fact, if you take the exam after that, the level of homework in school is many times lower than that in the exam. Students who apply for the exam say that they are afraid of not passing the exam. After passing the exam, there is no big problem in going to school." Jiashu said, "That can't be generalized." "Bo," he said, "it can't be generalized?" "It can be generalized. National University is just a name. As long as you are a prominent student and do not cross the school gate for many years, then it doesn't matter." Yang Wenjia, who often publishes his works in magazines, is an example. He once asked me to write a letter and introduced him to Nanbian Middle School, where he taught for a year and a half. He came back from the south and took the graduation exam. The school authorities didn't care about him because he was a famous student. You see how easy it is to get into the school. He was reading the regulations while talking. Looking behind him, he suddenly smiled and asked, "Family tree, where are you from today?" Although Jiashu felt guilty, he didn't believe that Bohi would see any flaws. So he said, "Don't you ask knowingly? I'm here to get the charter. Don't you know?" Bohi held the charter in his hand, shook his head, and said with a smile, "You lied to my face and treated my big brother like a child? This charter came from the post office a week ago." Jiashu said, "What evidence do you have that it was sent from the post office?" At that moment, Bohi stopped talking. He held the charter in one hand and pointed at the charter with the other hand, then smiled and stretched his hand in front of Jiashu. When Jiashu looked at it, he saw that it was stamped with post office ink, and the date and number were clearly printed on it. In any case, this cannot be concealed. Jiashu was so anxious that he could not explain why, but smiled at him. "Bo," he said, with a smile, "Child, you still can't lie. Aren't you going to say that you took the wrong charter in the drawer? The one you brought today was mixed up with the old charter in the drawer. The new one was not brought, but the old one was brought. If you say this, the flaw will be covered." Jiashu said with a smile, "It seems that you are an old liar." Bohi said, "You must have this ability. If you are willing to learn, let me teach you, slowly. You must know that lying is the only condition for dealing with women." Jiashu said, "What kind of woman do I have? Are you always so cute, me?" Bohi said, "Isn't that eldest girl from the Guan family very good to you? You should." Jiashu quickly stopped and said, "Do you know where the eldest girl from the Guan family is now?" Jiashu was originally a rhetorical question, but it was actually unintentional. Bohi thought he wanted to test himself, so he said, "What don't I know? She moved here and lived at the back door. Every time you go out alone, you spend most of the day. Instead of going to the back door, where are you going?" Jiashu said, "How do you know she lives at the back door? Did you see them move it?" At this time, Mrs. Tao suddenly walked out of the room and quickly started talking. Asked Jiashu, "When did my cousin come back? Have you eaten out? I have cakes and rose biscuits here. Do you want some?" Jiashu said, "I have eaten, but I can't eat any snacks." As Mrs. Tao spoke, she looked at Bohi's body. Bohi seemed to have come to his senses, so he also went into the room to get a cigar to smoke. He also took out a book from somewhere and lay down on the sofa to smoke and read. Although Jiashu missed Guan Shofeng very much, he could not talk to Bohi, but it always involved Miss Guan. She was highly suspicious, so she had to remain silent and walked away. But a big question arose in my mind. The Guan family had moved away without even him knowing. How did Bohi know that he had moved to the back door? If this matter is true, it must have been reported by Liu Fu. I will interrogate him later. Keep it in mind today. The next morning, Bohi went to the yamen. Mrs. Tao fell asleep and didn't get up because she had been dancing all night. The two children, accompanied by their mother, were sent to the kindergarten. Therefore, it was very quiet inside the upper room. After Jiashu got up, in addition to washing up, he took a stack of newspapers and read them on the sofa. This is an old rule. When reading the newspaper, Liu Fu will bring a plate of biscuits and a cup of milk. The Tao family is a somewhat European-style family. Although they don't officially have morning tea in the morning, things like evening coffee are indispensable. After a while, after bringing breakfast in, Jiashu smiled and said, Liu Fu, you have been here for many years, and things are very orderly. After hearing this, Liu Fu couldn't help but feel happy, and said with a smile, you're quite old, 6 or 7 years. Jiashu said, you just take care of things in the upper room, right? Liu Fu said, no, you're not busy at all. You just can't get out of bed all day long. Come. Jiashu said, fortunately, the uncle only has one wife. If he wants to marry his concubine, things will be a lot more complicated. Liu Fu said with a smile, according to our uncle's wishes, we have to ask for it a long time ago, but the uncle has a wife. Grandma is very smart, but this matter is not easy to handle. Jiashu said with a smile, you are not very smart. I think you have a lot of girlfriends. Liu Fu said, it doesn't matter if you have girlfriends. I have a lot of boyfriends. Jiashu said, Grandma's friends are real friends, so that doesn't matter. Your uncle's girlfriend is like a fairy on the dance floor, but that's not okay. I know your uncle's affairs. Paying special attention to women's affairs, such as my plan to learn some martial arts from Guan Shoufeng, is of no value. He always mentions it because there is a girl in the Guan family. She often said that the Guan family moved to the back door and asked me to find her. Do you think it's funny or not? After hearing this, Liu Fu seemed a little uncomfortable on his face. Jiashu said, it was moved to the back door. How could he know? Probably you got it from your uncle's investigation. Liu Fu didn't know what his master said, so he didn't dare to lie blindly, so he said, I didn't know it at first, because one time I went to the back door for something and met the old man from the Guan family. He said he was moving there. Where exactly do you live? I don't know either. Jiashu looked at that situation and guessed that the Guan family's move had something to do with him. He didn't know how to make the old man leave, so he felt very sorry. But they always wondered if I knew the old man. I don't need to be guilty of this suspicion. Now that I understand it, I don't need to ask further. I still talked about other gossips to cover up the matter. After lunch, Jiashu thought to himself that he had had enough fun these days. Now that he was angry, he should take care of some important homework. So I found 2 books and spread them out on the table facing the window to read. Before 3 pages could be seen, a footman came in and said, there's a call coming. Please speak to the young master. He was the footman at the gate. Jiashu knew that it was the telephone in the small living room in front that spoke, so he walked to the front to answer the call. Telephone. The speaker was a woman's voice, calling herself Shen. When Jiashu heard this, he was stunned. Where do you know such a person named Shen? Later she said, our girl is going to sing at a tea house in Jonington today. If you have nothing to do, you can come and have a cup of tea. Only then did Jiashu understand that the call was from Fengshi's mother, and Shen. Then he asked, which tea house is it at? She said, I can't remember the name. You can always find it if you go. Jiashu agreed with the word come and hung up the phone. After returning to the house and thinking about it, Fengshi had already gone to the tea house to sing drums. After all, the situation in this tea house is not as embarrassing as that under the bell tower of the outer altar. She is new to the tea house today. I must go and have a look. After such a calculation, there is no way to read the book that was just spread out. I finally suppress my temper and read the book, but I didn't read 3 pages, so why did I leave again? Let's read a book. So I put aside my previous thoughts and sat down to read. It's strange to say that as they looked at the book with their eyes locked, they just remembered the scene of Fengshi singing the drum and the attitude of talking to him, and slowly remembered them one by one, as if that person's voice and smile were right in front of him. I was still reading at first, but I stopped reading in the future. I pressed the book with my hand, my head was bent, and my eyes were shining directly out of the glass window. Outside the glass window, there were originally Jue's columns, painted eaves, and green grape trellises. However, his eyes never saw any of them. She was just a girl of 17 or 18 years old, wearing a light blue bamboo cloth, long gown, snow-white face, jet black braids, clearly neat. By the way, he was talking and laughing. This fandom appeared in Jiashu's mind, and he remembered the photo of Ae, thinking in his mind, when I collected the photo of Ae, it was stuck in a suit book, but which suit book was it in, and I didn't pay attention at the time. So I took out the books placed on the horizontal table one by one, and shook them, thinking that I could always find them by searching this way. Unexpectedly, I finished shaking the book together and no photos came down. What was clearly hidden in the book just now? Why can't I find it again? I don't know why today, but I'm always distracted and doing things erratically. I have found this photo twice today. It's so strange. So I sat on the chair and was lost in thought for a while, thinking carefully about where to put it. After much deliberation, it turned out that it was a good idea and should be included in the suit book. So I stood up and walked around the room in order to remember how to hold the book and how to hold the Ae. I accidentally walked outside to the room and saw a green suit book with a green shell placed on the side of the recliner. It was originally included in this book. At that time, we didn't go into the inner room at all. Isn't it ridiculous to search desperately in the inner room? I took out the photo from the book and leaned on the sofa to take a look. I was relieved of all the worries I had just been having. Seeing this, looking at each other with smiles, there is a sense of joy that welcomes people. I thought, she has been promoted from the open air of the clock tower to singing and singing in the tea house. She has finally risen to the next level. Today was the first time and I couldn't help but check it out. When I think about it, I can no longer sit at home. I took some loose money in the box, hired a car, and went all the way to Johnington. On this day, Johnington had the most visitors. Under the cypress forest, there were tea sheds and tea houses everywhere. Jiashu looked everywhere, but couldn't find Fengxi. He almost reached the back altar. There were 2 reed mat tents next to the red wall. Outside the tents was a large teapot stove, which was placed on a broken table to boil water. A little closer, there were more than 10 tables covered with half-worn white cloths, accompanied by a few old rattan chairs, all placed under the shade of cypress trees. Facing north, there were 2 long tables together. On the table was a 3-stringed instrument, and a drum stand was placed next to the table. Jiashu looked and wondered if it was here. The so-called tea house is just a name. It is actually a tea stall. On the cover of a cypress tree, there was a 2-foot-long white cloth with a line of large characters on it, which read Liuanlu Tea House. Jiashu saw it and couldn't help laughing to himself. Come, not only can't come far, there is no building here at all. Jiashu looked around and was about to leave when he saw Aunt Shen coming out from under the red wall. She was holding a large fan in her hand and stood in the sunlight. She waved to Fan Jiashu from a distance and said, "Mr. Fan. Mr. Fan, it's here." At the same time, Fengxi came out from behind her, holding a white cotton thread with a big ant tied to it, and nodded towards this side with a smile. Before Jiashu turned back, the tea seller came forward and said with a smile, "It's quiet here, have a cup of tea here." Jiashu looked around and saw that there were only 3 or 4 tables. If he didn't add to the number, he was afraid that no one would pay for the drum show. So he sat down at a table with a smile. Fengxi and Aunt Shen were both sitting at the horizontal table. She just happened to look over here. Jiashu understood that this was the rule of their singing. When they were singing for money, they didn't come to greet customers. After a while, Fengxi's uncle came over slowly, holding a cigarette in his mouth and nodding his head. Behind him followed a little girl of about 12 or 13, with a yellow face and 2 black braids hanging down from side to side. She ran and jumped, and her 2 braids swung back and forth, which was quite interesting. When they arrived at the tea house, Fengxi's uncle nodded to Jiashu from a distance, then sat at the front of the horizontal table and tried the Ae. Sanxian. First, the little girl of 12 or 13 sang a passage while beating the drum, and then took a small wicker plate and went to the tea house to beg for money. There were only more than 10 people in total, and only more than 10 copper coins were thrown, but Jiashu threw a copper Ae. The girl took the money back, and Fengxi stood up, pulled her blue bamboo cloth gown, and stroked her hair on both sides of the temples and the top of her head for a while. Then he went to the table, took the Ae drum board and started beating. When she sang, many passers-by stood outside the tea house to watch. When she finished singing, everyone expected to ask for money, so they left one by one. Fengxi's uncle put down his sanxian, looked at the backs of those who walked away, sighed slightly, and took the wicker plate to collect money from each table. When he came to Jiashu's table, he was particularly polite, squatted, stretched his neck, and smiled. Jiashu didn't know why, but he felt embarrassed to give it to Little, so he took out another dollar and put it in the wicker plate. Fengxi's uncle leaned forward and said, "Thank you, thank you." Jiashu didn't dare to delay because this place was too far from Dongkang, so he sat for a while, paid the tea bill, and went back. Since this weather, Jiashu must come once a day, listen to Fengxi finish singing, give $1 and leave. This went on for 4 or 5 days. One day, when he went back and walked to the gate of the inner altar, he ran into Aunt Shen. When she saw him, she smiled first, walked up to him and said, "Mr. Fan, are you going back? We have to invite you tomorrow." Jiashu said, "Come when I have time." Aunt Shen smiled and said, "Don't say that, don't say that. You have to come. Our girls are counting on you to support us. If you don't come, it will be boring for us." As she spoke, she supported her chin with the big fan, thought for a while and whispered, "I don't want you to listen to the drum tomorrow, so come earlier." Jiashu said, "Anything else?" Mrs. Shen said, "It's best to come early in the morning in this place. Don't you like to listen to Fengxi talking? I'll let her talk to you tomorrow." Jiashu blushed and said, "If you insist on me coming, I'll come in the afternoon." Aunt Shen looked back and saw that there was no one behind him. She fanned his arm gently and said with a smile, "Don't. It's so nice to come in the morning to breathe in the fresh air. I asked Fengxi to wait for you at the tea house at 6 o'clock. I can't come that early, but I can't come to accompany you." Jiashu wanted to say something, but he held back and stood in the middle of the road and smiled at Mrs. Shen. Mrs. Shen still fanned him gently and said softly, "Don't forget, come early. We'll meet tomorrow." "No, I won't be able to see you tomorrow. Let's meet the next day." After that, she smiled and left. Jiashu thought, she asked Fengxi to talk to me early tomorrow morning, not necessarily out of any emotional effect. I'm afraid it's just a special contact, and she wants me to pay more. But even so, I still have to come. If I hadn't come, Fengxi would have been left waiting here alone. How long would she have waited? When he returned that day, he lied to Bohe and his wife, saying that he was going to Tsinghua University to look for someone the next day and would have to leave the city early in the morning. Bohe and his wife knew that some of his old classmates were in Tsinghua, so they believed him. The next day, Jiashu went out early, and sure enough, he arrived at the Jonington after 5 o'clock. At that time, the sun was not very high in the east, and its pale yellow color slanted on the leaves of the cypress trees in the east. The cypress trees in the deep forest were not illuminated by the sun, and they were green, but they exhaled a refreshing cypress leaf fragrance. Entering the inner altar gate, there was a flat road under the cypress trees, and the grass flowers planted on both sides were particularly bright with dewdrops. People walked under the green shade, and the cool breeze in the morning brought the fragrance, blowing on people, and refreshed their spirits. The most beautiful thing is the morning glory on the short fence. In the green leaves, there are big, deep blue and light purple flowers, which are rarely seen. The weavers in the green leaves seem to be unaware of the dawn, and they make a ding-ding sound, occasionally making 1 or 2 night calls. There are no tourists on this long road. There is only a water hanging windlass outside the melon shed. There is an earthen well below. The windlass turns and makes a sound, as if someone is drawing water there. In such a quiet state, there is no trace of any living creatures. After walking for a while, there are a few long-tailed magpies jumping and looking for snacks on the road. When they see people coming, they fly up to the cypress tree with a hustle. The family tree circled around, but there was no one. I felt that I came too early, so I sat down on a chair on the roadside to rest. The gusts of cool wind blew on people, lifting their clothes and hair, which naturally made people feel comfortable. So I held the back of the chair with one hand and slowly fell asleep. When Jiashu was sleeping, he felt something rubbing his face and itching. He tried to brush it away with his hands several times, but it didn't go away. When he opened his eyes, Fengxi was standing in front of him, holding a flowered handkerchief in her hand. One of the horns of the handkerchief was dangling on the tip of his nose. Jiashu stood up and said with a smile, "Why are you so naughty?" Looking at her clothes, she changed into a blue bamboo cloth jacket today, tied with a black cloth short skirt, revealing 2 round legs with white socks underneath, and her hair was tied into 2 round buns. On her bare neck, a row of sparse long hairs were exposed. This is a sign of a woman who has not yet opened her face. However, in this plain woman's dress, it can best give people a sense of virgin beauty. Jiashu said with a smile. Why did you change into a female student's dress today? Fanxi said with a smile. I love to be a student. Mr. Fan, look at me like this. Can I pretend to be a student? Jiashu said with a smile. But I can pretend. It's true. As she spoke, she also sat down on the lounge chair. Jiashu asked, Your mother asked me to come here early to meet you. What does that mean? Fanxi said with a smile. Because you came in the afternoon, I have to sing the drum and can't accompany you, so I asked you to talk this morning. Jiashu said with a smile. You asked me to come and talk. What should we talk about? Fanxi said with a smile. Just talk. Why do we have to talk about something? Jiashu leaned sideways, leaned against the back of the chair, and smiled at her. Her eyes rolled and she smiled back. She took off the handkerchief from the button under her armpit, held it in her right hand, and just wrapped it around the index finger of her left hand. She lowered her head slightly, but did not look at Jiashu. Jiashu did not say anything, waiting to see when she would stop. After a while, Fanxi suddenly turned around and said with a smile, Why are you looking at me? Jiashu said, Aren't you here to talk to me? I'm waiting for you to talk. Fanxi bowed his head and pondered, Wait for me to think about what I want to say to you. Oh, I got it. Who are the people in your family? Jiashu smiled and said, You look smart. Why is your memory so bad? Didn't I tell you last time? Why are you asking again? Fanxi smiled and said, You really don't have it? No? As she said that, she looked at Jiashu and smiled. Jiashu said, I really don't have an engagement, so there's no need to lie. Why do you keep asking? Fanxi was a little embarrassed. She crossed her left leg over her right leg, pulled the 2 corners of her handkerchief with both hands, and rubbed it on her knees. After a while she said, It doesn't matter if you ask. Jiashu said, It doesn't matter, but you keep asking me. I don't know what you mean. Fanxi shook her head and smiled, no meaning. Jiashu said, You asked me, can I ask you? Fanxi said, You know all my family members. Why are you asking? Jiashu said, I know those who have met me. How can I know those who have not met me? You ask me if I have, and you also ask me if I have? Fanxi raised her head to the side when she heard this, but ignored him. On her face you can see that she is slightly happy, as if she is smiling. Jiashu said, You are unreasonable. Fanxi quickly twisted her body and turned around and said, How am I unreasonable? Jiashu said, I told you everything you asked me. You didn't say a word of what I asked you. Isn't this unreasonable? Fanxi laughed and said, I really don't know what I asked you, but you knew what you asked me. You did it on purpose. Jiashu laughed out loud when she told him. Fanxi said, The air here is very good in the morning. Take a walk, and don't just chat. As she said that, she stood up first, and Jiashu also stood up, and then accompanied her in the garden. The 2 walked and didn't realize they were deep in Berlin. Jiashu said, Tell me the truth. Your mother asked you to meet me early in the morning. Is there something you want from me? Fanxi heard this and refused to say anything, just lowered her head and walked away. Jiashu said, What's embarrassing about this? If I can do it, I can do it. If I can't do it, even if you hit a snag, there are only you and me here, and no one else knows. Fanxi still lowered her head, looking at the square brick road, counting bricks one by one and walking forward, and still lowered her head and said, If you are willing to do it, you will definitely do it. Jiashu said, Then just tell me. Fanxi said, I'm really embarrassed to say this, but you have to forgive me otherwise. I won't tell you. Jiashu said, Even if you don't say it, I understand. Could it be that your mother asked you to ask me for money? Fanxi nodded when she heard it. Jiashu asked, How much does it cost? Fanxi said, We have only known each other for a short time, and you have spent a lot of money. I really shouldn't ask you for money. But in the end, I am not free, so I have to say this. My mother has discussed with Kuyungzuan and let me sing there. But in that house, I can't be as casual as I am now. I have to make 2 sets of clothes. So I want to discuss with you and borrow 10 or 8 yuan. Jiashu said, Okay. As he said that, he felt around and took out a 10 yuan bill and handed it to her. Feng Shi took the money and carefully put it in her pocket. Then she raised her head and turned around, saying solemnly, "Thank you very much." Jiashu said, "I gave you the money, but I feel sorry for you to sing drums in a Luozi pavilion." Feng Shi said, "Do you think it's better to sing like a beggar?" Jiashu said, "It's not like that. You are singing for money now because you are so poor that you have no choice but to ask people for money. People just throw a few coins to listen to you. If you go to a Luozi pavilion, you will still ask customers to spend $1 to order songs, and you must be praised by people. It's hard to say what will happen in the future. That place is very decadent. Do you understand the word degenerate?" Feng Shi said, "Of course I don't understand. There is nothing I can do." As she said this, she still lowered her head, looking at the square bricks under her feet. Step by step, counting the clouds, she passed. Jiashu was also silent and walked with her. After a while he said, "Don't you want to dress like a schoolgirl? If I send you to school, will you go?" After hearing this, Feng Shi suddenly stopped walking. She turned around and looked at Jiashu and said, "Really?" Then she smiled and said, "Don't joke with me." Jiashu said, "I'm not kidding. I think you have great talent, like a scholar. I am willing to help you, and help you get a good result." Feng Shi said, "I will never forget your kindness. But my family is counting on me to make money. How can I not sing?" Jiashu said, "Since I want to help you, I will help you to the end. How much money your family needs every month is mine. I tell you honestly that my family still has a little money. I don't mind spending an extra 180 yuans a month." Feng Shi pulled Jiashu's hand, jumped slightly and said, "My lifelong dream has come true today. If you can really save me like this, I will never forget your kindness." Then she stood up, bowed to Jiashu, turned around and ran away. Jiashu was stunned. Why did she run away? To know the reason for running away, we will explain it next time. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.